Hi everyone. I am going to be walking you through the water testing and a little bit of background into water testing for Diane at the Pottsboro Area Library. So congratulations on everybody that's getting their water tested. This is a pretty exciting thing to be able to actually know what's in your water. Water testing is usually fairly expensive. So it's a great opportunity for everybody to get a chance to actually see how healthy their water is. So why would you even want to test your water? Well, regardless of your water source, there's two main situations that may require testing. There's a lot of minor things that you might be interested in for water testing, but the two main ones are if you suspect lead or some other contaminant might be in some of your plumbing or your water service lines. This tends to be a pretty big problem right now as we have aging infrastructure. You got to understand that a lot of the testing, most water systems will test for lead and other things as part of their normal water monitoring. But these tests actually give a picture of what's at the wellhead. So most of the time they do these tests either where the water is exiting from the water treatment plant or where the water is coming into their system, the source water. That's where the testing occurs. But what happens after that is the water goes through a bunch of different lines going to everybody's house. So all those lines can start to age or can have cracks or different things in them. And contaminants can enter your water system from the wellhead to your faucet at home, depending on how it travels and what shape the pipes are in, what the pipes are made of. But what they test at the water company doesn't always reflect the conditions at your specific kitchen faucet or your hose outside. So it's very, you have to actually test to find out if it's in there. So if you want to know if your home's drinking water has unsafe levels of lead or any other chemical, you're going to have to test for it. Unfortunately, our limits of detection, our ability to smell or taste things is not very good. So when things are dissolved in water, it's really hard to tell that they're there. And the only way that you can tell if something's there is if you specifically test for that substance. So it's really going to be great to be able to see what shape your water's in. I know I've looked at the TCEQ records for the area, and I know there were some problems, especially in like 2012 and around in there. But it looks like they have fixed them and they're getting fairly decent results. But remember, those results are at the waterhead or at the source. So now you're going to get a chance to see what's actually coming out of your faucet. So that's a pretty good thing. Also, are you considering a home treatment unit? So like if you're wanting some kind of water purification system, a water softener system, you're wanting to put some kind of filtering system underneath your kitchen sink or some other place in your water system, then it's really important to know what's in that water, because depending on what's in the water, that helps you be informed to make a really good decision about what's the best filtering system. Do you need reverse osmosis, or can you just do a cation exchange or an anion exchange? What kind of things do we need to put in that system in order to keep your water as safe as possible and as clean as possible? There's a really good site, EPA.gov Safe Water, that takes you through a lot of water testing. That's a pretty good source to go to. So the most common contaminant violations in Texas, this is according to TCEQ. You see that arsenic's pretty high. You think, arsenic? Well, Texas actually has quite a bit of arsenic in our soils. Arsenic was also used in cotton fields and tobacco fields for a pesticide back in the early days. So they put a lot of arsenic on the fields, and that arsenic stayed in it went into the soil, and it actually percolates and can get down into the groundwater. So arsenic is there both from agricultural practices of the past and also natural deposits. So surprisingly, Texas is pretty high in arsenic, higher than a lot of other regions in the United States. Then we have nitrates. Nitrates are usually from agricultural runoff. You know, we put a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers on things. So those nitrates can actually get into the water system and cause a few problems. We also have down here 11% radon. Radon is a radioactive gas. There's quite a bit of radon in the atmosphere in this area, so radon can be a problem. There's also other radioactive things like uranium and different large heavy metals that release some radioactivity. Those can also be found. These are mostly from natural deposits. Natural deposits, there's not a lot you can do about those. One part that's actually increasing over, and you know, it's becoming really a visible problem is disinfectant byproducts. So, you know, most of the time back in the early days of testing, before the copper and lead rule, where everybody has to test for copper and lead at the water source, we would just test for coliforms and E. coli and things like that in rural water systems. There's a different level of testing required for a large municipal water system versus a small rural system. So small rural systems, usually meters under 1,000 meters, so under 1,000 customers. Those tend to not have to test for as many extensive things. So, you know, E. coli and coliform are different things that are like living organisms in the water that can make you sick. How they dealt with them is they would dump a bunch of hypochlorite in there, a bunch of chlorine or bromine in there to kill any kind of bacteria and plasmodiums and all kinds of stuff that might be in the water. But now we're finding out that, yeah, that fixed that, but now we have a bunch of reactivity between organic matter. So if there are carbon-based compounds in there, if there's already compounds in there, those can become chlorinated, and now they come with health problems. So there's a really fine line between how much chlorine is okay, and they're finding a real problem with disinfectant byproducts. That's what those disinfectant byproducts are, is that is from the actual water treatment themselves, and then there's chemical reactions going on with things that are in the water that are creating things that are health hazards. So you hear about a lot about haloacids and stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit. Fluoride is another problem, especially for small water systems, because there isn't extensive testing. If you add fluoride to something that already has fluoride in it, you can imagine that you actually have more than what you were planning to add. And that seems to be the problem. Large municipalities, they will actually test to see how much fluoride is in there, and then they will add the amount of fluoride it takes to get it to the level that they want to take it at. Smaller municipalities that don't have the fluoride testing, then they just sort of guess, well, you know, we're going to dump fluoride in there ever so often. Well, there still might be some fluoride residual from previous applications, so you can actually get an increase in fluoride that can be a little too high. And then other is 16%. I think it's interesting that arsenic is so huge in the state of Texas, and that's one of the metals that we're going to be testing for is arsenic. Okay, the most frequent regulatory violations in the state of Texas, according to the Texas TCEQ, it's 28% is lead and copper rule. This really is from our aging infrastructure. There's a lot of problems with lead and copper leaching into the water systems as the pipes are getting older. Usually the coating that they put in pipes to protect from that only lasts about 25 years. We can imagine as a lot of cities and small municipalities and rural water systems, as they're aging, most of them have pipes that are well in excess of 25 years. So there can be quite a bit of leaching occur. So lead and copper is actually becoming a problem all the way across the entire United States. It's not just Detroit, it's everywhere that you can have some lead and copper leaching into your water system. Once again, disinfectant byproducts, 24% of the violations is from disinfectant byproduct problems. and then 48% for all the others. But you can see almost half of all water violations is copper, lead, and disinfectant byproducts. So this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem as it's testing for it. Because remember, you can't find things unless you test for it. So once it became obvious that we need to keep an eye on this, now they're finding that there was a lot of levels of these chlorinated and brominated compounds, and that was from water treatment. So they've had to really take a long look at how they're actually treating water now, and a lot of changes have been made. So what tests are we going to be running? Well, the first test is volatile organic compounds. This is going to be a test to see if there's like carbon-based compounds that can be a problem to health in your water. And then we're going to test for five different metals: arsenic, because it's such a problem in Texas, cadmium, chromium, lead, and last but not least, mercury. So you're going to be tested for, your water's going to be tested for volatile organic compounds and 5 different metals. And these metals are health hazard metals. So it'll be good to know just, if it's there. If it's not there, that would be good information to know about your household. So let's look at volatile organic compounds. We've already talked about disinfectant byproducts. So these are chlorinated and brominated compounds and cause massive ranges of health effects, even at very, very low levels. They can accumulate. A lot of pesticides are actually chlorinated organic compounds. So they can be quite toxic. Then we have fracking chemicals and petroleum products. We live in a county that has been heavily fracked. There is, especially in the Pottsboro area, there's a lot of petroleum-based products that have been stored, used, and transported. This includes your xylenes. There's MTBE is an additive that they put in gasoline to replace lead. So when they took lead out of gasoline in the mid-'80s, they put in this MTBE, and then it was found that MTBE is a carcinogen, and we have a lot of contamination of water with MTBE because once it gets in the water, it's really hard to get out. So it's very stable. It lasts for a lot of years, and it really likes water. It's a type of ether. It interacts with water quite well, and also benzene. Now, xylenes and benzene-based products, benzene is a carcinogen, MTBE is a carcinogen, xylene is just toxic as it builds up. But many of these are in water in very, very, very low amounts. So it's not an acute poison. You're not going to get sick right away from it, but this is a concern over a long period of time, like our water systems are in our houses. You're exposed to that over a very long period of time. In a very small amount over a long period of time, you can start seeing some health effects. Pesticides, herbicides, and agricultural chemicals are just ubiquitous in our atmosphere. There's just so much out there that's been used, and a lot of these don't break down. So there's things like atrazine, glyphosate. So atrazine, that's the one that they banned in California, that it actually causes endocrine disruption, and it was changing the sex on frogs. So you can imagine if it's doing things like that, what is it doing, to our endocrine system? Glyphosate, that's your Roundup. It is everywhere. There is glyphosate everywhere. Another thing is pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are getting to be a real problem in our water systems, because when you take pharmaceuticals, most of the time you get rid of them, in your urine, and then your urine goes to, in a lot of cases for us, goes to a septic system, and that septic system will actually leach out, and it can get into the groundwater. So we have found in Lake Texoma during some testing, I used to work at the OU Biological Station, and there was somebody that came and did a survey of all the different bacteria that they found in the lake. And they actually found over by one of the marinas, when they sampled, they found a bacteria that its specialty was eating estrogen. That's what it fed off of. That was its favored food supply was estrogen. So they found this bacteria everywhere, and they're going, why is there so much estrogen? This bacteria that feeds on estrogen. Well, then they finally, were able to connect it to people taking birth control pills, and it was leaching out of the septic systems. And in this area that had a lot of septic systems, it was actually leaching into the lake there, and then those bacteria were able to come in and break it down. So there's all kinds of pharmaceuticals in our water, even Prozac, progesterone, all kinds of different pretty potent pharmaceuticals can wind up in our water stream. So it's good to look at volatile organic compounds just to see what's going on. Chronic exposure to low levels can lead to impaired immune system function. Your liver can get damaged, and there's a risk of cancer. High levels can cause nervous system depression. Most of the time, you don't have high levels unless you have a really serious problem, like maybe a petroleum leak or a pipeline going down, and you have a home, you have your own private well. You can get high levels of exposure if you have a spill or a dump site or something like that close to where you live. Short-term exposure, it's possible that you can get skin irritation or mucous membranes if there's fumes coming off. A lot of these, once they hit the open air, once they get up in the air, they will actually volatilize. The vapors will come off of the water, and sometimes you can breathe it in. So that can be a danger as well. So if you want to know, is there petroleum-based activity and fracking going on in the Pottsboro area, I pulled up the Texas GIS viewer and asked it to show me the pipeline. So you can see there has been quite a bit of petroleum activity. Most of these now are natural gas. If they're natural gas, most of these greens have been fracked. So there has been a lot of fracking in the area that uses very potent chemicals. And although it's a very low concentration, when you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons, that can start being a fairly substantial amount of benzenes and xylenes and different chemical solvents and different things that they put in the fracking water. If you're interested, there is a place called frackfocus.org. This is a voluntary disclosure search. So that means that some of the companies that do the fracking, they will voluntarily give a list of all the contaminants and all the fracking chemicals that they use in the frack location. So you can actually pull up and see if there is a fracked well close to you and what chemicals they use. So this is voluntary. It's not, not all of them do that. But as you can see, we're pretty active. And if you get over towards Hagerman, there's even more going on. All these blue dots you see here are capped wells. So that was previous oil wells that have been capped off, and they're considered dead wells. They're not used anymore. But understand that they still have that that casing and everything is still in there. So there still could be contamination coming off some of these old wells. These red dots here, most of those are injection sites. So those are waste injection wells. You can see there's quite a few of them in the Pottsboro area. And all these green lines, those are pipelines. Those are pipelines. Most of those are natural gas pipelines, but some of them are also crude. So there is a lot of activity in Pottsboro, so it makes a lot of sense to have your water tested for volatile organic compounds. It just makes a lot of sense, and it will give you a good idea of if you should be concerned or not. And if you do come back that you have some volatile organic compounds, you can easily filter those out. So I highly recommend everybody put a filter underneath their sink anymore. But just to give you an idea of why it's so important to test for volatile organic compounds around Pottsboro. Okay, next let's go to arsenic. Like I said, arsenic is actually natural in the state of Texas. It leaches from natural deposits, and we have a lot of them. Wood preservatives, pesticides, and industrial deposits. They used to use arsenic as a pesticide. Then you have petroleum production, semiconductor manufacture, which we've had in the area. Definitely have petroleum production, and then coal power plants. So those are all sources where you can get some arsenic contamination. Potential health effects, they're endocrine disruptors, so they can interfere with your endocrine system, which handles all your hormones and different things like that in your body. They have been found to cause some cancer, skin, bladder, lung, kidney, liver, and prostate. This is really bad if you're breathing the deposit, so say in coal power plants and places like that where you can breathe it in. Also harms your cardiovascular and nervous system, so it's a pretty nasty metal. It's a lot of people have been poisoned with arsenic in the past. Maximum containment level is going to be in this milligrams per liter. That's known as a part per million. So it's actually well under a part per million. It's actually 10 parts per trillion. So the maximum containment level is 10 parts per trillion. The target is 0. So maximum contaminant level is what they set for if the water exceeds this, it must be dealt with. So that's mostly for water companies and things like that. If you find it in your water, you definitely want to make sure that you are handling that and taking care of it, especially if you're on a rural water and you have your own private well. The maximum contaminant goal level, that's the goal that the EPA wants to set, is 0. And the World Health Organization is at 10 parts per trillion. Excuse me. There's a great website where you can learn about water, and it's Water Quality Association. They have these, that's where I got all this information. They have some great breakdowns of all the different things that can be in water. The best treatment options are green sand. If you have like a rural well, manganese green sand works. Ion exchange, anti-exchange, and reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis is a very powerful technique for cleaning water, but it can be pretty pricey. But ion exchange is definitely doable for most people's private homes. Next, we have cadmium. Cadmium used to be in batteries. So cadmium was a popular metal to put in batteries, especially like A's and double A's and triple A's and D's and C's. So the batteries that we use every day. So the sources of contamination, they actually come off of galvanized pipes, erosion of natural deposits, discharge from metal refineries, and waste batteries and paints. So a lot of times, if there's a lot of batteries out on the dump, they will get cadmium actually coming off of them. Now, they haven't used cadmium in batteries for a long time. That's why now you can throw away your non-reusable batteries, your double A's and your triple A's and all that. You can throw those away in the trash. There's no toxic metals in there. But before, I believe around 2000, we had to really start cracking down because they started finding this cadmium that was actually leaching into the groundwater. And batteries were a real problem. Is use them and throw them away, go through billions of batteries a year, and then those batteries were leaching cadmium. Potential health effects, short term. This is if you really get exposed to a large quantity, the short term. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, muscle cramps, liver injury, convulsions, shock, and renal failure. It's pretty nasty metal. But this is in really high quantities, so most water systems, there's no way you're going to ever approach anything close to this. But long-term trace amounts can start interfering with your kidney, your liver, your bone, and your blood. So cadmium can be very destructive once it enters your body, and very small doses over a long period of time can cause chronic problems. The maximum contaminant level for this, you'll notice now we're down to 5 parts per trillion. So they even allow less of this than arsenic. The goal is the same, 5 parts per trillion. Notice the World Health Organization guideline is 3 parts per trillion. We used to match the World Health Organization guideline, but there's been a lot of industry push to raise the metals allowable for discharge purposes. So you will notice that we have sort of creeped upwards a little bit on our limits. So 3 parts per trillion from the WHO and 5 parts per trillion for EPA. Best treatment options, you can filter it out if it's a solid, but ion exchange, lime helps precipitate it out of your solution, and of course reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis works on everything. Okay, next we're going to look at chromium. Chromium is actually necessary for your body. Some of your enzymes and things like that actually require chromium to function, but it depends on what form the chromium's in. So there's sources of contamination for water. These are, you can get trivalent chromium, which is chromium 3+. It just is the charge on the chromium. And then you have hexavalent chromium, which is 6+. 3+ is naturally occurring. It's not highly toxic, but there can actually be things in the water that can change it from, it can oxidize it from a trivalent chromium to a hexavalent chromium. Hexavalent chromium is highly toxic substance. So hexavalent chromium can cause nausea, gastrointestinal distress, stomach ulcers, skin ulcers, allergic reactions. You can get kidney and liver damage, reproductive problems, and lung and nasal cancer if you breathe it in. It's a highly toxic substance, but it depends on what form it's in. So a lot of times tests will just give you the chromium. Some tests can give you whether it's trivalent or hexavalent. The maximum contaminant level is actually 0.1 parts per million, or actually 100 parts per trillion. So a little bit higher than the other two that we've looked at. The WHO is half of the EPA limit. So the WHO is 50 parts per trillion, or 0.05 parts per million. Best treatment options for this, it depends on what it is. If you have trivalent, you can get it out by reverse osmosis, distillation, or a strong acid cation resin. With hexavalent, you need reverse osmosis, a strong base anion, or weak base anion. So it actually takes a different type of resin depending on which one you have in your water. So it's really important to know which type you have. Okay, next, lead. Lead is the one that probably everybody knows the most about. Sources of contamination, it's mostly our lead service lines. Lead containing solder, and then brass fittings of different types. Brass is actually 2.5% or so of lead. So lead can leach out of brass, but it's mostly from the solder and from the service lines. They used to use lead service lines for water. And that lead, as there's other things in the water that can, it can actually cause that lead to come out of the pipes and get into the water stream. Industrial processes, mines and smelting, those actually produce quite a bit of lead, but they're usually not directly sourced into water. So most of the time it is coming from, the brass fittings and the different things in the actual water lines, especially aging infrastructure. Potential health effects, children are at high risk. It causes reduced intelligence, impaired hearing, and decreased growth in children. You can actually stunt their growth. It also causes damage to the brain, kidneys, and bone marrow, and the nervous system and the red blood cells. So lead can have some pretty serious health effects. Maximum contaminant level is 15 parts per trillion. With EPA, the goal is 0. They're really trying to get all the lead out. The World Health Organization, WHO, is 10 parts per trillion. So EPA is 15 parts per trillion before the water company has to do something. The World Health Organization is 10 parts per trillion. Okay, the best treatment option, once again, reverse osmosis and a strong cation exchange. Distillation will also work. So that's lead. And last but not least, we have mercury. Sources of contamination, Service lines, lead-containing solder, so solder can also have mercury. It's a great amalgam. It dissolves other metals, and it's a liquid at room temperature. So mercury has been used a long time to make alloys of different metals to give them specific properties. Brass can also have mercury in it. Industrial processes, mines, and smelting, but once again, that is not a direct source into the water. Potential health effects, believe it or not, metal mercury, there's no really advisories in drinking water, but it can be rough on your kidneys. The really dangerous thing about mercury is its organic form. And I believe the tests we're doing, it separates it out and tests for the organic form. So you might hear methyl mercury or ethyl mercury. That is when mercury attaches to a carbon containing compound. Once it gets that carbon compound, it can go into your cells and start interfering with your body. So it can damage the brain, kidneys, and very dangerous for a developing fetus. Effects on brain functioning, it can actually change your mood. So you can get like a mercury rage, irritability, shyness, tremors, changes in your vision or hearing or memory problems. And that comes from the effects that it has on the brain. So heavy metals can create quite a bit of havoc inside our bodies. Maximum contaminant level is going to be 2 parts per trillion, and that is also the goal, 2 parts per trillion, which is pretty low. Most of the problem that we have from mercury in our area comes from the methyl mercury and ethyl mercury actually absorbing into the tissues of fish, and that's how we take it in. It's not as much a problem with our drinking water as it is our sports fishing and things like that. So we can actually take in organic forms of mercury by eating fish out of the lake that has taken in this mercury into their bodies. Best treatment option is reverse osmosis and also anion exchange and distillation. So you'll notice almost all these treatment options we have, reverse osmosis works on everything because it basically takes everything out of the water. It separates it by driving it through a membrane, which only water can go through. But on anion and cation exchange, an anion exchange will pull out everything that's charged negatively out of the water. Cation exchange will pull everything that's charged positively out of the water. So usually you see these two working together on water systems. You'll have an anion exchange and a cation exchange. That basically takes out anything that has a charge, which that's most of our heavy metals and different things like that. And then they'll have it'll be a 3-stage filter. The third filter will actually be a charcoal filter. And that charcoal filter will take out all the organic contaminants. So a really good option is to have a 3-stage filter. You'll have the anion exchange, the cation exchange, and the carbon, and that pretty much takes everything out of your water, makes it really clean. Not highly how are we going to take the water samples? So you're going to pick up your kit and get everything lined out. You'll get a chain of custody form, and you'll get your bag with your bottles in it. It's really important. Do not open the containers until right before you fill them. You don't want to take the lid off and set them over on the counter or set them out in the yard, wherever you're about to take your samples. You do not want to open them until right before you get your water, and it's called a grab. You're going to grab some water with the bottle, but you don't want any outside contaminants in that sample. You also don't need to rinse these bottles because these bottles are coming straight from the lab. They are prepared and ready to just take your water sample and close. So don't open them until you're actually ready to sample your water. Most water samples are taken in an outdoor hydrant right before the water enters the home. Now realize this is not going to catch any contaminant past that point that's in your home's plumbing, but it will test the source water entering your home. So if you have a private well, it will test everything that's coming up out of that private well. If you're on a water system, it will test everything coming up to your home. But if you have an older home, you might want to test inside the home, because now if you're concerned about lead pipes, plumbing issues, I would take a grab at the kitchen sink. But realize if you take a grab at the kitchen sink, that's not going to let you know whether that contamination is coming from your water system, you know, all the pipes leading up to your home, or the problems in your home. But it will tell you what is in your water at your kitchen sink. So you're going to need to make that choice, which answer or which question you want the answer to. Do you want to know what's coming up to your house, or do you want to know what's coming out of your sink? But if you choose what's coming out of your sink, you can't know for sure whether it's coming from your plumbing in an older house or if it's coming from the plumbing. But the main thing is you will know exactly what's in that water and how to deal with it, how to deal with any contaminants. Disconnect any water hoses or attachments to the faucet, especially if you do the outside. You don't want to run anything through a water hose. You want direct out of the faucet with nothing attached. First step is to let the water run 5 minutes to flush the line. So you want to make sure that the water that you're getting is actually coming from the source and through the pipes, and it hadn't been sitting there. Sometimes if it sits in the pipes for a while, you can get readings on things. So that lets you know if there is something in the water. It's a good idea to always flush your water before you use it if it's been a while since you've let it run. But let the water run for 5 minutes. And then as soon as the line's been flushed, you're going to slow the flow way down where it's controllable. And then you're going to take the lid off and carefully fill your sample bottles just to the shoulder of the container. You don't want a lot of headspace in the bottle, but you don't want to fill it all the way up to the very top either, because we're probably going to have to add some preservative in here. So just fill it up to the shoulder of the plastic bottle and almost to the very, very top of the vials. Now put the lid on as soon as you get the water in there and make sure they're not leaking. So I would invert them a couple of times to make sure that there's no leakage. Don't over tighten the lid. Sometimes you can actually make these bottles leak by putting the lid on too tight. So just snug it down and then turn it over and see if you are not getting any leaks. If so, then you're ready to seal the bottles and the vials in the plastic bag. And these need to go in the refrigerator until you drop them back off at the library. It's very, very important to keep your samples cool until you deliver them to the library. You do not want them warming up. And then you're going to fill out your chain of custody document and bring it in with your samples to the library. So let's look at that chain of custody document right quick. So this is a chain of custody. These are very important. They are actually legal documents. So you will have one that is pre-printed. It will already have the analysis methods and all this stuff on it. You only have to worry about a few places. Okay, so here is the part of the chain of custody form that you're going to be needing to fill out. So make sure that in section 8, when you come to pick up your sample bottles and your kit, you need to put whoever is going to be doing the sampling, you need to put their name and sign and the date that you picked up the kit. So this is the person actually filling the bottles along with the date that the kit was picked up. And then when you actually do the sampling, you are going to be filling out the sample ID and the description in section 9. Ask Diane how to name your samples when you pick up your kit. You're going to put your sample name and then the date you actually did the grab and the time, and make sure to realize this is a 24-hour, so it's a 24-hour time, so 1300 is actually 1 o'clock and 1:20. So that is when these two samples were picked up. You can do whatever time that you need to. Write the date and time you grabbed the sample, and also indicate in the description whether it's the faucet for an outside sample or the sink for the inside sample. So that way we know whether they were faucet or sink. Make sure that you do the same method for both of them. So if you want to sample inside your home to get an idea of what your indoor plumbing is, you would make that a sink sample and make sure all the vials are filled. You're going to have a 500 ml a large plastic bottle, and 2 small glass vials. And all 3 of those are going to have the same water grab in them. And make sure that you write that it's a faucet. Faucet is going to mean outside water going into the house. Then you're going to place the samples sealed in a plastic bag in the fridge until dropping them off at the library. Samples must be kept cool until they arrive at the lab. They can change a little bit if they get warm, so you want to make sure you keep them cool to get an accurate measure of what's actually in your water. And then you're going to write the sampler's name here in section 19 when you drop them off at the library. The same person that filled out section 8 needs to sign off on section 19 that when they delivered it to the library. So you'll put the date and the time, This one probably should be like 420. I just copy pasted. So don't pay attention to that date. Make sure that you put the date you pick it up. This is when you sample with the time, and then this is when you drop it off. So all those need to be filled out, and these 2 should match. So the person who gets the kit should relinquish the kit. It should take about a week to 10 days to get results once the lab receives the sample. So you should know something within about a week to 10 days. So what happens when your results come back? That's probably the big question. If there's contaminants in your water, you may want to invest in a water purification system. Even if they're really low level contaminants, still over time, you can see how sometimes those build up. A lot of toxicity testing is done on acute toxins, which means you see results immediately. There's not really a lot of toxicity testing that's long-term that shows its results over time. We get most of those from what's called epidemiological studies, where people get sick and they try to trace back what caused it. So long-term damage really isn't well known. So if you do have some of these problem contaminants, it's probably a good idea to put a water purification system at least at your kitchen sink. Being exposed to tiny amounts of some heavy metals and volatiles can still be harmful over a long period of time. The best choice is always reverse osmosis. As you saw in most of those slides, reverse osmosis works for everything. The only problem is they're very expensive to put in. They're very time consuming to maintain properly. And if you're not maintaining your system properly, then it really doesn't do a lot of good. So you can have problems with membranes fouling, different things with the reverse osmosis system. They're just a lot more work to keep functioning at their top ability. So what I usually recommend for people is a 3-filter system under the sink. So 3-phase filter. These usually contain a cation exchange, an anion exchange, and then charcoal filtration. So the cation exchange is going to pull all the positive particles out. Those are going to be your heavy metals, all kinds of positively charged things. The anion exchange will pull out all the negatively charged stuff. So anything that has a negative charge is pulled out. So those 2 will get rid of anything that's charged in your water, which is a lot of the nitrates and contaminants and different things like that. And then your neutral things that don't have a charge will usually come out in charcoal filtration. So this triple combination is just really effective. It's very easy to change. I actually have one under my sink. I change out my filters every 6 months, and I have really good water. I've tested the water coming out of it, and it is just as clean as it can be. So these are very easy to get. They're usually run anywhere from about $150 to $250. And then the filters are, every 6 months you have to buy the filters. But they are really a good little system, and you can just put them underneath your sink right at the kitchen, and then use that water for all your cooking and your drinking and anything where you want to make sure that you don't have any contaminants in your water. So that's a really good system. You can also get whole house systems, and you can also get systems for private wells. But that's a really good investment in your health, because water is extremely important, and clean water is even more important. Okay, so that's about it. If you have any questions or you run into any snags, please contact Diane at the library. And here is her information. You can email the library or give her a call. And as a reminder, this project has been supported in part or full by federal funds through the National Library of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health with the University of North Texas Health Science Center. So the content is a responsibility of the authors and does not necessarily represent the official views of NIH. So these are basically my take on water sampling, and it in no way reflects on any of the organizations that's produced funding. But I'm really excited about y'all's opportunity to see what's in your water, and I look forward to seeing the results. And now it's time to get sampling. Everybody, good luck. And I hope you find the answers that you're looking for. And this is a pretty exciting little project. And I enjoyed being a part of it. Bye-bye.